The black Mercedes S-Class purred through the rain-soaked streets of Lagos Island, its chrome wheels reflecting the neon lights that painted the night in electric blues and reds. Inside the leather-wrapped sanctuary, Chidi Okwu adjusted his 18-karat gold Patek Philippe watch, a timepiece worth more than most Nigerians would earn in 3 lifetimes. The soft jazz playing through the Burmester sound system couldn't drown out the satisfaction humming in his chest. Another board meeting conquered, another billion-naira deal sealed with the stroke of his Mont Blanc pen. At 45, Chidi Okwu was Lagos royalty without royal blood. His empire stretched from the glass towers of Victoria Island to the oil refineries of Port Harcourt. Hotels, real estate, construction, if it built wealth in Nigeria, Chidi's fingerprints were on it. The street hustler who once sold phone cards in Onitsha market had become the lion of Lagos business, and tonight, he was returning to his Banana Island mansion where his wife Amina and their 2 children waited in climate-controlled comfort. The rain drummed against the bulletproof windows as his driver, Segan, navigated the evening traffic. Street hawkers darted between cars, their goods protected by torn plastic sheets. Children pressed their faces against shop windows, watching the luxury vehicles pass like moving dreams. This was Lagos, a city where extreme wealth and desperate poverty danced together in the same streets, sometimes separated by nothing more than a sheet of tinted glass. "Sir, traffic is heavy on Broad Street," Segan announced through the intercom. "Should I take the 3rd mainland bridge?" "Whatever gets us home fastest," Chidi murmured, already thinking about the warm dinner waiting for him, about his daughter Kemi's school play next week, about the weekend getaway he'd promised his wife to Dubai. As they slowed at the traffic light near the National Theatre, something made Chidi glance out the window. Perhaps it was instinct, or maybe the ancestors whispering warnings through the rain. There, huddled beneath the faded overhang of an abandoned shop, sat a figure that made his blood freeze in his veins. The beggar was ancient before his time, his clothes hanging like rags on a frame that had once been strong. His feet were bare against the cold concrete, toes curled with arthritis and years of walking on unforgiving pavement. In his weathered hands, he held a dented tin cup that caught the few naira coins thrown by hurrying pedestrians who barely glanced his way. But it was the scar that made Chidi's world tilt on its axis, a thick, raised line that ran from the man's left ear down to his jawline like a permanent reminder of violence survived. That scar was burned into Chidi's memory from 25 years ago, when they were both young men fighting to survive in a Nigeria that chewed up the weak and spat out their bones. "Stop the car." The words exploded from Chidi's throat with such force that Segan nearly crashed into the vehicle ahead of them. "Ogre, but the rain. Stop the bloody car now." The Mercedes lurched to the curb, its hazard lights blinking like confused eyes. Through the rain-streaked windshield, Chidi could see photographers from a nearby movie premiere beginning to notice the expensive car's erratic behavior. His security detail in the following Range Rover was already radioing questions about the unplanned stop. Chidi's hands shook as he reached for the door handle. In his mind, he was no longer a billionaire in a $1,000 suit. He was 20 years old again, cornered in an alley in Onitsha with 3 armed robbers demanding the day's earnings that would have bought his dying mother her medication. He remembered the terror, the certainty of death, and then, like an angel of vengeance, Emeka appearing from the shadows. The car door slammed behind him, and suddenly Chidi was standing in the Lagos rain, his Italian leather shoes splashing through puddles that reflected the neon signs above. The photographers' cameras began clicking rapidly. This was news. Chidi Okwu, the man who never made public appearances without his publicity team, was standing in the rain looking like he'd seen a ghost. Emeka. The name fell from his lips like a prayer. The beggar's head snapped up, and their eyes met across 25 years of separation. Time collapsed between them. The scar was more pronounced now, a silver line against weathered skin. The eyes that had once blazed with righteous fury were dulled by years of disappointment and struggle. But it was him. God in heaven, it was really him. Emeka stared at the man approaching him through the rain. The boy he had once called brother was now draped in wealth. Suit that cost more than a teacher's annual salary, shoes that gleamed despite the puddles, a watch that caught the light like a small sun on his wrist. This was what Chidi had become while Emeka scraped for survival in Lagos's unforgiving streets. "My God," Emeka whispered, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "Chidi." The cameras flashed around them like lightning, capturing every moment of this impossible reunion. Social media would explode within minutes. #ChidiOkwu trending alongside photos of Nigeria's most successful businessman embracing a street beggar in the rain. The contrast was stark enough to break hearts and generate headlines. Designer suit against tattered rags, manicured hands against calloused palms, the scent of expensive cologne mixing with the honest smell of sweat and struggle. "Brother," Chidi reached out, his voice breaking. "What happened to you? How did you?" But Emeka's expression hardened like cooling iron. The initial shock was giving way to something darker, more complex. 25 years of questions, of abandonment, of watching the boy he'd saved become a man who'd apparently forgotten the blood debt between them. Emeka leaned forward, close enough that only Chidi could hear his words over the rain and the clicking cameras. His voice was soft, but it carried the cutting edge of a man who had nothing left to lose. "I know what you did to get all this wealth, brother. I know about the shortcuts you took, the people you stepped on, the bodies you buried under your foundations." His eyes glittered with dangerous knowledge. "And if you don't help me now, truly help me, everyone else will know too." The words hit Chidi like physical blows. Around them, the photographers sensed something more than a simple act of charity. They pressed closer, their cameras hungry for the real story behind this dramatic encounter. Chidi's security team was approaching, speaking urgently into their radios. His driver had stepped out of the car, holding an umbrella that seemed pitifully inadequate against the storm that was about to break over all their lives. The rain fell harder now, as if the heavens themselves were weeping for what was about to unfold. What would you do if your darkest secrets walked back into your life during a thunderstorm? Drop a rain emoji in the comments if you believe the past always catches up with us. Tell us what country you're watching from, Lagos to London, Accra to Atlanta, we see you. Don't forget to subscribe because this story is about to get wild. The gates of the Okwu mansion on Banana Island swung open with silent precision, revealing a world that existed in stark contrast to the rain-soaked streets of Lagos. Italian marble gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and fresh flowers flown in daily from Holland. This was where Nigeria's elite lived, behind high walls, security cameras, and the comfortable illusion that money could keep the world's problems at bay. Amina Okwu stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the main living room, her silhouette elegant against the storm outside. At 42, she was still stunning, the kind of beauty that made men stutter and women feel inadequate. Her Brazilian hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders, and her body, maintained by personal trainers and the finest cosmetic surgeons money could buy, was draped in a white silk kaftan that cost more than most people's cars. In her manicured hands, she held her iPhone, watching the same video that was already spreading across Nigerian social media like wildfire. The footage was shaky, shot by some amateur photographer who'd stumbled onto the story of the year, but the image was clear enough. Her husband, Chidi Okwu, Nigeria's most successful businessman, standing in the rain embracing a street beggar like a long-lost brother. The sound of the Mercedes pulling into the circular driveway made her look up from the screen. She could see Chidi through the rain-streaked window, still sitting in the back seat, his head in his hands. Even from a distance, she could tell something fundamental had shifted in her carefully ordered world. "Mummy, have you seen Papa's video?" Their 16-year-old daughter Kemi bounded into the room, her own phone in hand. At 16, Kemi had inherited her mother's beauty and her father's sharp intelligence, but unlike her parents, she hadn't yet learned to hide her emotions behind social masks. "Everyone at school is sharing it," Kemi continued, oblivious to the tension radiating from her mother. "Jennifer's dad says it's going to be in all the newspapers tomorrow. Papa looks so sad in the video. Who do you think that man is? Before Amina could answer, the front door opened with its familiar electronic chime. Chidi entered like a man walking to his execution. His expensive suit plastered to his body, water dripping onto the imported marble. His normally perfect appearance was destroyed, hair disheveled, shoes squelching with each step, the confident bearing that had made him a legend in Nigerian business circles completely absent. Who is he? Amina's voice cut through the entrance hall like a blade. Chidi stopped, his hand still on the door handle. For a moment, he looked like he might flee back into the storm rather than face the questions in his wife's eyes. Just someone from my past, he said finally, his voice hoarse. Amina laughed, a sound like expensive crystal breaking. Just someone? Chidi, I've been married to you for 17 years. I've seen you negotiate billion-naira deals without blinking. I've watched you shake hands with presidents and kings. But I have never seen you cry. Not when your mother died. Not when our son was born. Not even when you thought you were going to lose the company in 2008. She held up her phone. The video paused on a frame that showed Chidi's face streaked with tears. But this homeless man makes you weep in the rain like a child. So don't insult my intelligence by calling him just someone. Their son Emeka, named ironically after the very man who had just shattered their evening, appeared at the top of the curved staircase. At 14, he was all awkward limbs and uncertain voice, but his eyes held the same calculating intelligence that had made his father rich. Papa, the video has 3 million views already, young Emeka announced, his voice cracking slightly. They're calling it The Billionaire and the Beggar. Some people are saying it's beautiful, but others. He hesitated, seeing his parents' faces. Others are asking why you never help poor people publicly. They're saying maybe you have something to hide. Chidi's phone buzzed insistently. Text messages from board members, missed calls from his publicist, WhatsApp notifications from social groups where his name was undoubtedly being dissected with surgical precision. In the space of 2 hours, his carefully constructed public image had developed cracks that threatened to bring down everything he'd built. I need a shower, he muttered, heading for the staircase. You need answers. Amina blocked his path, her heels clicking against the marble with military precision. 17 years. Chidi. 17 years of marriage, and you've never mentioned this man. What kind of hold does he have over you? Chidi's phone buzzed again. This time, he glanced at the screen and his face went white. The message was from an unknown number, but the words made his blood turn to ice. I hope you remember the promise you made me in that hospital room 25 years ago. Tomorrow at noon, the Murtala Muhammad Airport parking garage, level 3. Come alone, or the whole of Nigeria will know what kind of man you really are. The families of those who died because of your greed deserve justice. His hands trembled so violently that he nearly dropped the phone. Amina, ever observant, noticed immediately. What is it? She snatched the phone from his hands before he could protest. Reading the message, her expression shifted from suspicion to something approaching fear. Greed. Families who died. Chidi, what is this man talking about? It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. Her voice echoed through the marble halls. Because right now, I'm thinking my husband has been living a lie for our entire marriage. I'm thinking that everything we have, this house, our children's education, our social standing, might be built on something terrible. Upstairs, both children were listening through the carved wooden railings. This was the first time they'd ever heard their parents fight with such raw intensity. Their world, private schools, luxury vacations, the certainty that money could solve any problem, suddenly felt as fragile as spun glass. Chidi looked up at his children, then back at his wife. These 3 people were his entire universe, more precious to him than all his business empire. But how could he explain the choices a desperate young man had made 25 years ago? How could he tell them that their comfortable life was built on foundations that might not bear close examination? "I was different then," he said quietly. "Young, desperate, willing to do anything to survive. Emeka saved my life once, and I let him down when he needed me most." "What did you do?" Amina's voice was barely a whisper. Chidi's phone buzzed again. Another message. "Check tomorrow's Punch newspaper. The headline will interest you. E." The storm outside seemed to grow stronger, rain lashing against the bulletproof windows like accusations demanding to be heard. The sins of the past never stay buried forever. What do you think Chidi did that could destroy his empire? Drop your theories in the comments. And hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's chapter will reveal secrets that will shock you to your core. Share this with someone who loves Nigerian drama. From Abuja to New York, Lagos to London, let's break the internet with this story. The clock in Chidi's study showed 2:47 a.m., but sleep was as distant as his carefree youth. He sat behind his mahogany desk, a piece carved from a single tree in the Cross River forest, worth more than most people's houses, staring at newspaper clippings spread before him like evidence in a criminal trial. Each article was dated 25 years ago, when Nigeria was still finding its feet in democracy and young men could disappear into the system without a trace. The headlines told a story he'd spent decades trying to forget. Building collapse kills 12 in Onitsha. Construction company owner flees country. Families demand justice for industrial accident. But these weren't the complete truth. The complete truth was locked away in a safe behind his bookshelf, along with bank statements, forged documents, and photographs that could destroy not just his reputation but his freedom. His phone had been buzzing all night. Journalists, business associates, even government officials wanting to know about the viral video. But the message that kept his blood cold came from Emeka at midnight. "Do you remember Ikenna? The foreman who tried to stop you from using substandard materials? His widow still lives in Onitsha. Still asks questions. Tomorrow's newspaper will refresh everyone's memory." Chidi's hands shook as he poured himself another glass of Hennessy XO, his third since coming to the study. The alcohol burned, but not nearly as much as the memories clawing their way back to the surface. 25 years ago, he'd been nobody. A hustler with big dreams and empty pockets. The construction contract for the Onitsha shopping complex was supposed to change everything. Instead, it became a nightmare written in blood and concrete. Footsteps in the hallway made him quickly shuffle the clippings into a drawer. Amina appeared in the doorway, her silk nightgown ghost-like in the dim light. Her beauty was ethereal at this hour, but her eyes held the hardness of a woman whose trust had been shattered. "You haven't slept," she observed, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "Neither have you. Hard to sleep when your husband's past is trending on Twitter." She held up her phone, showing him the hashtag Chidi Awkward Truth that had over 50,000 tweets. "People are digging, Chidi. Old photos, old articles, old questions that apparently never got answered." He could see some of the tweets on her screen. Why did young Chidi Okwu leave Nigeria suddenly in 1999? What happened to the construction company investigation? Who was the missing witness in the Onitsha tragedy? What do they want from us? Amina's voice carried exhaustion and fear in equal measure. Before Chidi could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown, but he knew who it would be. "Answer it," Amina commanded. "Put it on speaker." Chidi's finger hovered over the screen. Everything that happened next would determine whether his family survived the coming storm intact. "Hello, brother." Emeka's voice filled the study, and Amina leaned forward, studying her husband's reaction to every word. "What do you want?" Chidi's voice was barely controlled. "Justice. For Ikenna. For his family. For the 12 people who died because you chose profit over safety. There was a pause, filled with the sound of Lagos traffic in the background. I've been watching you for years, Chidi. Watching you get richer while their families stayed poor. Watching you receive awards for charity while the blood money in your foundation came from their deaths. Amina's eyes widened. Blood money. Deaths. Awards. The pieces of a puzzle she'd never known existed were falling into place. I tried to find you after I got out of prison, Emeka continued. 15 years I spent there because I took the blame for your crimes. 15 years while you built your empire on my sacrifice and their graves. Prison. Amina mouthed the words silently, her hand covering her mouth. You promised me. Emeka's voice grew stronger, more accusatory. In that hospital room after I got this scar saving your miserable life, you promised you'd take care of me if anything ever happened. But when the police came, when they needed someone to blame for the collapse, you disappeared like smoke. Left me holding the bag while you ran to America to let things cool down. The study felt like it was closing in around them. Amina was staring at her husband as if seeing a stranger, while Chidi seemed to age years with each of Emeka's words. I can give you money. I don't want your blood money. Emeka's voice exploded through the speaker. I want you to face what you did. I want you to tell those families the truth about why their children died. I want you to confess that you bribed officials to use substandard materials, that you threatened workers who tried to report safety violations, that you fled the country when people started asking questions. Amina stood up so quickly her chair fell backward. You killed people. Her voice was a whisper that seemed to echo in the large room. It was an accident, Chidi began. An accident you caused. Emeka's voice cut him off. An accident you covered up. An accident you let me go to prison for while you rebuilt your life in America. You went to America? Amina's voice was rising with each revelation. When? How long were you gone? What else have you lied about? Chidi looked at his wife, the woman who'd borne his children, shared his bed, stood beside him at countless social events, and realized she was looking at him like he was a monster. 3 years, he said quietly. I was in Houston for 3 years, working construction, sending money back through intermediaries. When I came back, I had enough capital to start over, and the heat had died down. The heat had died down? Amina's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. 12 people were dead, your friend was in prison, and you were worried about heat? Through the speaker, Emeka's voice carried 25 years of pain. Tomorrow morning, every newspaper in Nigeria will carry the real story. Copies of the original investigation files. Testimony from workers who were too scared to speak before. Bank records showing the bribes. Everything. Unless, Chidi asked, though he already knew there would be conditions. Meet me at the National Theatre tomorrow at noon. Alone. We'll hold a press conference where you'll confess everything. The families deserve to hear it from your mouth, not read it in the papers. The line went dead, leaving husband and wife staring at each other across a chasm of deception that had suddenly opened in their marriage. 17 years, Amina said finally. 17 years of lies. I was going to tell you. When? Her voice was cold as Lagos harmattan wind. When were you going to tell me I married a murderer? Outside, dawn was breaking over Lagos, but in the study, darkness seemed to be falling over everything Chidi Okwu had built. Truth has a way of breaking down even the strongest walls. What would you do if you discovered your partner's darkest secret? Comment, confession, if you think Chidi should tell the truth. Fight if you think he should fight back. Share this story if you believe in karma. What goes around, comes around. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's chapter will blow your mind. While Chidi sat in his study wrestling with ghosts from his past, Amina stood on the balcony of their bedroom, her phone pressed to her ear. The storm had passed, leaving Lagos gleaming under the early morning sun, but the tempest in her heart was just beginning. "He's everything you said he was," she whispered into the phone, her voice carrying across the water toward Victoria Island. "A liar. A killer. A man who built his empire on other people's graves." On the other end of the line, Barrister Conall Ademola's voice was smooth as aged whiskey. "Are you ready to proceed with what we discussed?" Amina closed her eyes, 22 years of memories washing over her like a tide. She was 19 again, a second-year law student at the University of Lagos, deeply in love with Conall, the brilliant final-year student who made her believe in forever. They had plans: marriage after graduation, a law practice together, children who would inherit their combined intelligence and ambition. Then Chidi Okwu had walked into her life. Not the billionaire Chidi of today, but the hustling, charming returnee from America with stories of success and pockets full of dollars that seemed endless to a girl from a middle-class family in Acadia. He'd seen her at a party, pursued her with the single-minded determination that would later make him rich, and swept her off her feet with expensive dinners, weekend trips to Abuja, and promises of a life beyond anything Conall could offer. The choice had seemed simple at 19, steady love with a future lawyer, or exciting passion with a man who seemed destined for greatness. She'd chosen excitement, breaking Conall's heart and her own in the process. "I've been ready for 20 years, she answered now, her voice hard as diamond. "Every day of this marriage has been preparation for this moment." Downstairs, she could hear Chidi moving around his study, probably destroying evidence or making desperate phone calls. Their children were still asleep, blissfully unaware that their world was about to implode. Soon enough, they would learn that their father was not the hero they'd worshipped, but a man with blood on his hands. "The divorce papers are ready," Conall continued. "Given what you've discovered about his past, we can claim fraud, that you married him under false pretenses, not knowing about his criminal activities. You'll get everything. Everything." The word tasted sweet on her tongue. The mansion, the cars, the businesses, the Swiss bank accounts she discovered over years of careful investigation. All of it would become hers, and through her, Conall's revenge against the man who had stolen his future would finally be complete. But revenge was only part of the plan. The deeper truth was that Amina had never stopped loving Conall. Even as she lay in Chidi's bed, bore his children, and played the role of the perfect businessman's wife, part of her heart had remained in that university classroom where a young law student had first made her believe in love. "What about Emeka?" she asked. "The man from the video?" "Already handled. I've been in contact with him for months, feeding him information about your husband's whereabouts, his routines, his vulnerabilities. The encounter yesterday wasn't accidental, it was orchestrated." Amina felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "You've been planning this for months?" "Years, my dear. Ever since I saw the wedding photos in the newspapers and realized the woman I loved had married a criminal." Conall's voice carried a lifetime of pain and calculation. "Emeka's anger is real, his grievances legitimate. But his timing? That was my gift to justice." The bedroom door opened behind her, and Kemi entered in her school uniform. Crisp white shirt, navy skirt, the confident bearing of a girl who'd never questioned her place in the world. "Mummy, I can't find my physics textbook," Kemi said, then stopped when she saw her mother's face. "Are you okay? You look." "I look how?" Amina slipped her phone into her pocket. "Scary. Like you're planning something terrible." If only you knew, Amina thought. But Kemi would understand someday. When she was older, when she could appreciate the complexity of adult relationships and the price of betrayal, she would understand why her mother had done what needed to be done. "Your textbook is in your father's study," Amina said. "But don't go in there now. He's dealing with some business issues." Kemi's eyebrows rose. At 16, she was old enough to sense undercurrents, smart enough to know when adults were hiding things. "Business issues? Is this about the video from yesterday? Everyone at school is talking about it." What are they saying? Some people think Papa is a hero for helping a homeless man. But others. Kemi hesitated. Others are asking questions. Why hasn't he helped poor people publicly before? Who was that man really? Why did Papa look so guilty? Guilty. Even their daughter could see it. The mask Chidi had worn for 25 years was finally slipping, revealing the man beneath, the man Amina had slowly discovered over their years of marriage. The man who woke up screaming from nightmares he wouldn't discuss. The man who donated millions to charity with one hand while hiding evidence of his crimes with the other. The man who had built their entire life on a foundation of lies. What if everything we think we know about Papa isn't true? Kemi asked suddenly. What if he's not the man we thought he was? The question hung in the air like smoke. Amina looked at her daughter, beautiful, innocent, trusting, and felt a moment of doubt. When the truth came out, when the newspapers printed their stories and the police came with their handcuffs, Kemi and her brother would suffer too. They would go from being the privileged children of a respected businessman to the offspring of a convicted criminal. But then she remembered 19-year-old Kunal, crying in her university dormitory room as she returned his engagement ring. She remembered 20 years of marriage to a man who had never fully given her his heart because it was too busy hiding his secrets. She remembered all the nights she'd lain awake wondering who she had really married. People aren't always who they seem to be, Amina said finally. Sometimes the person you trust most is the one hiding the biggest secrets. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kunal. Everything is in motion. By tomorrow night, you'll be free. Free. The word had never sounded so beautiful or so terrifying. Downstairs, Chidi's voice could be heard on a phone call, probably to his lawyers or his publicist, trying to manage the crisis that was spiraling beyond his control. He had no idea that the biggest threat to his empire wasn't coming from outside. It was sitting right beside him every night, planning his downfall with the patience of a woman who had waited 20 years for justice. "Mummy," Kemi said softly, "are you and Papa going to get divorced?" The question was asked with the casual tone teenagers used for serious subjects, as if divorce was just another adult complication they'd have to navigate, like tax returns or mortgage payments. "Would that frighten you?" Amina asked. Kemi considered this seriously. "I think it would frighten Papa more than us. He needs us more than we need him." Such wisdom from someone so young. Chidi did need them, needed the facade of family respectability, needed the image of the successful businessman with a beautiful wife and perfect children. Without them, he was just a criminal in an expensive suit. "Go get ready for school," Amina said. "And remember, no matter what happens in the next few days, your father loves you very much, even if he hasn't always made the right choices." After Kemi left, Amina stood alone on the balcony, looking out over the Lagos skyline where her husband's empire rose like monuments to ambition and deception. Soon, very soon, those monuments would come crashing down. The thunder rolled across Lagos like the voice of angry ancestors, shaking the windows of the Aqua mansion as nature itself seemed to protest the deception that had poisoned this home for 20 years. It was 8 p.m. and the family sat around their Italian marble dinner table in a silence so thick it could be carved with a knife. Kemi pushed her jollof rice around her plate, her usual teenage appetite destroyed by the tension crackling between her parents. Young Emeka, ironically named after the man who was now threatening to destroy their family, sat rigid in his chair, his 14-year-old mind trying to process the fragments of adult conversation he'd been overhearing all day. The dining room that usually echoed with laughter and comfortable family chatter now felt like a courtroom where everyone was both judge and accused. Chidi had aged a decade in 24 hours. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, shirt wrinkled, tie loosened, the confident bearing that had made him a legend in Nigerian business circles completely absent. He kept checking his phone obsessively, waiting for messages that would either save his empire or destroy it completely. Amina, by contrast, looked almost serene. She was dressed in a flowing white agbada that made her look like a priestess preparing for a ritual sacrifice. Her movements were precise, calculated, as if she was performing a ceremony that had been rehearsed for years. "The newspapers are going to print something tomorrow, aren't they?" Kemi finally broke the silence, her voice carrying the forced maturity of a teenager who had been thrust into adult realities too quickly. Chidi's fork clattered against his plate. "What makes you think that?" "Because you've been getting phone calls all day from people with titles. Honorable this and chief that. Because Mummy keeps looking at you like she's saying goodbye. And because the man in the video obviously knows something that could hurt us." Smart girl. Too smart for her own good, Chidi thought. At 16, Kemi already showed the analytical mind that would make her formidable in whatever field she chose. But right now, her intelligence was turned toward unraveling the carefully constructed lies that had held their family together. "Your father has some business challenges," Amina said smoothly. "Nothing that can't be handled." "Business challenges don't make grown men cry in the rain," young Emeka observed, his voice cracking slightly. "And they don't make mothers pack suitcases in secret." The words hit the table like a slap. All eyes turned to Amina, whose serene mask slipped for just a moment. "You've been packing?" Chidi's voice was barely a whisper. "Just being prepared," Amina replied, but her confidence wavered. She hadn't expected her children to be so observant, so ready to call out adult deceptions. Kemi leaned forward, her eyes blazing with inherited determination. "Prepared for what, exactly? For Papa to go to jail? For us to lose everything? For our family to fall apart?" The questions hung in the air like accusations. Outside, the thunder grew louder, and the first drops of rain began hitting the floor-to-ceiling windows with sounds like tiny fists demanding entrance. Chidi's phone buzzed again. This time, the message made his face go white as bone. "What is it?" Amina asked, though her tone suggested she might already know. Chidi held up his phone so they could all see the notification from Google News. "Breaking. New evidence emerges in 25-year-old Onitsha building collapse case." The family stared at the headline in silence. Then Kemi, with the fearless curiosity of youth, reached for her father's phone. "Don't," Chidi started, but it was too late. Kemi was already reading aloud. "Anonymous sources have provided this newspaper with previously sealed documents from the 1999 investigation into the Onitsha shopping complex collapse that killed 12 people and injured dozens more. The documents suggest that the original investigation was compromised by bribery and intimidation, and that key witnesses were silenced or disappeared." She looked up at her father with eyes that seemed far older than 16. "Papa, what is a key witness who disappeared?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Chidi felt the walls of his carefully constructed life closing in around him. For 25 years, he had run from this moment, built walls of wealth and respectability to keep it at bay. But now, sitting at his own dinner table with his children staring at him like he was a stranger, he realized there was nowhere left to run. "I was young," he began, his voice barely audible above the thunder. "Desperate. My mother was dying, we had no money for her treatment, and I saw an opportunity to make enough money to save her." "By cutting corners on a building?" Young Emeka's voice was sharp with accusation. "By using bad materials that made it fall down?" "It wasn't supposed to fall down." The words exploded from Chidi with 25 years of suppressed guilt. "The engineers said the materials would be adequate for a 3-story structure. We never planned to go higher than that." "But you did go higher," Amina said quietly. She wasn't asking a question. Chidi nodded miserably. "The investors wanted more floors, more shops, more profit. And God forgive me, I needed that money so badly. My mother was getting worse. The medical bills were crushing us, and I convinced myself that the building would hold." But someone tried to stop you, Kemi said, still reading from the phone. A foreman named Ikenna Okafor tried to report safety violations. He disappeared 2 days before the collapse. The name hit Chidi like a physical blow. Ikenna. The honest man who had tried to do the right thing. The man whose disappearance still haunted Chidi's nightmares. I didn't kill him, Chidi said quickly, seeing the horror in his children's eyes. I would never, but I knew people who could make problems disappear. I told them to scare him, to make him go away. I never meant for him to be hurt. But he was hurt, Amina said. Her voice carried strange satisfaction, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. Wasn't he? Chidi's silence was answer enough. The thunder crashed overhead, and suddenly the lights went out. In the darkness, illuminated only by the emergency lighting system, the family sat like strangers around a table that had once represented everything they thought they knew about each other. When the lights flickered back on, they revealed something that made everyone gasp. Standing at the dining room's entrance, water dripping from his torn clothes, was Emeka. Not young Emeka, their son, but the other Emeka, the ghost from Chidi's past who had somehow gotten past all their security. How did you? Chidi started to stand, but Emeka raised a hand that stopped him cold. Your security guards are good, Emeka said, his voice carrying the weight of 25 years of suffering. But they're not watching the old servant's entrance that you've forgotten about. The one I helped you install when you were planning this house 15 years ago. The family stared at this specter from another life. He looked even more haggard than he had in the rain the day before, but his eyes blazed with purpose. I came to return something, Emeka said, pulling a small object from his pocket. It was a gold chain, the same one Chidi had worn as a young man, the one he'd given to Emeka as a token of brotherhood after Emeka had saved his life. You gave me this and promised we'd be brothers forever, Emeka continued. You promised that no matter what happened, you'd never abandon me. Do you remember? Chidi's eyes filled with tears. I remember. Then you'll also remember what you promised when I took the blame for Ikenna's death. When I agreed to go to prison so you could escape to America. The children looked back and forth between the two men like spectators at a tennis match, trying to follow a conversation about events that had shaped their entire lives without their knowledge. You promised that when you came back rich, you'd take care of Ikenna's family. You promised you'd make sure his widow and children never wanted for anything. Do you remember that promise, brother? Chidi nodded, unable to speak. 15 years I spent in prison. 15 years while you built your empire. And in all that time, did you ever once visit Mama Ikenna? Did you ever send money to put his children through school? Did you ever even remember their names? The questions were like slaps, each one leaving a mark on Chidi's conscience. I tried to send money, but I couldn't find them. Liar. Emeka's voice shook the crystal glasses on the table. They were in the same village where you left them. Ikenna's oldest son, Chinedu, died of malaria because they couldn't afford medicine. His daughter Adiz dropped out of school to work as a housemaid. His widow, Mama Ikenna, spent her last years selling roasted corn on the roadside. Each revelation was a hammer blow to Chidi's heart. He had spent so much energy running from his past that he'd never looked back to see the destruction he'd left behind. But the worst part, Emeka continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more power than his shouts, is that you named your son after me. You took my name, the name of the man whose life you destroyed, and gave it to your precious boy. Was that guilt, Chidi? Or was it mockery? Young Emeka, namesake and unwitting symbol of his father's crimes, looked between the two men with growing understanding and horror. The room fell silent except for the thunder outside and the sound of 25 years' worth of buried truth finally clawing its way to the surface. When the past comes knocking, it doesn't ask permission to enter. What would you do if you discovered your whole life was built on someone else's suffering? Comment, guilty, if you think Chidi deserves what's coming, mercy, if you think everyone deserves a second chance. Share this story if you believe the truth always finds a way out. Hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's chapter will reveal the most shocking twist yet. The morning after Emika's dramatic appearance at their dinner table, the Aqua household felt like a crime scene. Yellow police tape might as well have cordoned off each room, marking the death of innocence and the birth of terrible knowledge. Kemi sat in her bedroom, her school uniform hanging unworn in the closet. How could she face her classmates when every newspaper in Nigeria was dissecting her family's secrets? Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, each notification like a small explosion of curiosity and judgment. Girl, is your dad really a killer? WhatsApp message from Jennifer, her supposed best friend. My dad says your family is going to lose everything. Text from Michael, the boy who'd been trying to ask her to prom. Are you okay? Do you need somewhere to stay? This one from Sarah, her closest friend, and the only message that showed genuine concern rather than gossip hunger. Through her bedroom window, Kemi could see the journalists gathering like vultures outside their gate. News vans with satellite dishes, photographers with telephoto lenses, reporters practicing their dramatic deliveries for the evening news. The circus had come to Banana Island, and her family was the main attraction. Downstairs, she could hear her parents arguing in voices that rose and fell like a tide of recrimination. Her father's voice, pleading and desperate. Her mother's voice, cold and cutting. And underneath it all, the terrible knowledge that everything she had believed about her life was a lie. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Kemi. It's Papa. She wanted to pretend to be asleep, to avoid the conversation that would change everything between them forever. But the pain in his voice made her decision for her. Come in. Chidi entered looking like a ghost of the confident man who had left for work just 3 days ago. His expensive pajamas hung loose on his frame, as if he was shrinking inside his own skin. His eyes were red-rimmed from sleeplessness and tears. We need to talk, he said, settling into her desk chair like an old man with arthritic bones. About which lie? The words came out sharper than she intended, but she was 16 and angry and her world was falling apart. Chidi winced. I know you hate me. I don't hate you, Papa. I don't know who you are anymore. She looked at this stranger wearing her father's face. The man I thought was my father was a hero. He built schools and hospitals. He helped poor people. He taught me that success meant lifting others up with you. I am that man. No. Her voice was quiet but firm. That man doesn't exist. You created him to hide the real you. The man who let people die for money. The man who let his friend go to prison to save himself. The man who abandoned children to poverty and death. Each word was a knife thrust, precisely aimed and devastatingly accurate. Chidi had faced hostile boardrooms, aggressive journalists, and government investigators, but nothing had prepared him for his 16-year-old daughter's moral clarity. I can explain. Can you explain why you named Emika after the man whose life you destroyed? Can you explain why you've been lying to us every single day for our entire lives? Can you explain why Mummy has suitcases packed like she's planning to run away? The last question caught Chidi off guard. What suitcases? I saw them in her closet last night. 3 of them. Packed with clothes, documents, jewelry. Either she's planning the world's longest vacation, or she's planning to leave you. Chidi's face went white. In all his calculations about how his past might destroy his business, his reputation, his freedom, he had never seriously considered that it might cost him his family. She wouldn't. Wouldn't she? Kemi pulled out her phone and showed him a screenshot of a text message she'd accidentally seen on her mother's phone. Look at this. The message was from someone saved in Amina's contacts as K. Everything is ready. The moment he confesses publicly, we file the papers. You'll have everything by Christmas. Chidi stared at the screen, his mind racing. Who is Kay? Before Kemi could answer, footsteps in the hallway announced someone's approach. But it wasn't Amina or young Emeka. It was Emeka, the other Emeka, emerging from the shadows like he had every right to be in their home. Good morning, brother, he said to Chidi, then nodded respectfully to Kemi. Good morning, small madam. How are you getting into our house? Chidi demanded, though his voice lacked its usual authority. The same way I got in last night. The same way I've been getting in for weeks, watching your family, learning your routines, preparing for this moment. Emeka's smile was cold but not unkind. Your security is designed to keep out strangers, not family friends. You're not family, aren't I? Emeka pulled a worn photograph from his pocket and placed it on Kemi's desk. This was taken 26 years ago. Your father and I, after we'd just gotten our first construction contract. Look at how happy we were. Look at how much we loved each other. Kemi picked up the photograph, studying the faces of two young men with their arms around each other's shoulders. Her father looked impossibly young, his smile genuine and unguarded. Emeka looked strong and confident, unmarked by the scar that now defined his appearance. What happened to you two? She asked softly. Life happened, Emeka replied. Choices happened. Your father chose money over friendship, safety over integrity, his future over everyone else's. And what did you choose? The question came from the doorway, where young Emeka now stood, his 14-year-old face grave with premature understanding. The two Emikas, one aged by suffering, one still innocent but learning fast, regarded each other across the room. I chose loyalty, the older Emeka said simply. Even when loyalty meant prison. Even when loyalty meant poverty. Even when loyalty meant watching the person I'd sacrificed everything for forget I existed. But now you want revenge, young Emeka observed. No, boy. I want justice. There's a difference. Chidi stood up abruptly, his guilt transforming into anger. Justice. You want to destroy my children's futures because of mistakes I made 25 years ago? How is that justice? Your children. Emeka's laugh was harsh. Tell me, Chidi, when did you start caring about children? Where was this paternal concern when Ikena's son died of malaria? When his daughter dropped out of school? When dozens of other children lost their fathers in that building collapse? The accusations hit home, but they also sparked something in Chidi, a fighting spirit that had been dormant since this nightmare began. Those were accidents. Tragedies. But destroying my family won't bring those people back. No, Emeka agreed. But it might prevent future tragedies. It might teach other powerful men that actions have consequences, even 25 years later. Kemi looked between the two men, her father and his former friend, and realized she was witnessing something larger than a personal vendetta. This was about justice and accountability, about whether the wealthy and powerful could escape the consequences of their actions simply because they had money and connections. What do you really want? She asked Emeka directly. He turned to her with something approaching kindness in his weathered face. I want your father to face what he did, to confess publicly, to make amends to the families he destroyed, to accept responsibility like a man instead of hiding behind lawyers and money. And if he does that, then maybe we can all find peace. But even as he spoke the words, they all knew it wasn't that simple. Outside, the journalists waited like hungry dogs. Somewhere in the house, Amina was packing her escape. And in a few hours, the morning newspapers would hit the streets with stories that would finish what yesterday's video had started. The game was in motion now, and none of them could predict where the pieces would fall. The Lagos Children's Foundation annual gala was the social event of the season. a night when Nigeria's elite gathered under crystal chandeliers to celebrate their philanthropy, while photographers captured their designer gowns and charitable smiles for society magazines. The Eco Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed into a wonderland of gold and white, with ice sculptures shaped like angels and enough flowers to stock a botanical garden. For 20 years, Chidi Okwu had been the star of this event. His foundation's contributions to orphanages, schools, and children's hospitals across Nigeria were legendary. Tonight, he was supposed to receive the Lifetime Achievement Award for philanthropy, a golden trophy that would join the dozens of others in his study. Instead, he sat in his Mercedes outside the hotel, watching the city's power players arrive in their luxury vehicles, knowing that in a few minutes he would either salvage his reputation or watch it burn on national television. "You don't have to go in," Amina said from beside him. For the first time in days, her voice held something approaching concern. She looked stunning in a gold-beaded gown that cost more than most people's annual salary, her hair swept up in an elegant chignon that showcased diamond earrings worth a fortune. "If I don't go, they'll say I'm guilty," Chidi replied, adjusting his bow tie with trembling fingers. "If I do go, they'll destroy you publicly," she finished for him. Through the tinted windows, they could see the red carpet stretching from the street to the hotel entrance, lined with photographers and journalists. The same media that had made Chidi a celebrity was now hungry to tear him down. "The children want to come," Amina said suddenly. "Kemi thinks she can help somehow. She has some plan." "No." Chidi's voice was sharp. "They've seen enough. Whatever happens tonight, they don't need to witness it." But even as he spoke, he spotted a familiar figure walking up the red carpet with confident strides. Kemi had somehow gotten out of the house and was approaching the gala in a simple black dress that made her look years older than 16. "How did she?" Amina started, then her phone buzzed with a text from their daughter. "Some truths are too important for hiding. Love you both. Kay." "She's your daughter," Chidi said with something approaching pride despite his terror. "Stubborn as iron when she believes she's right." They watched Kemi navigate the red carpet like she'd been born to it, stopping to speak with journalists, her young face serious and determined. Even from a distance, they could see she was giving interviews. "What is she saying?" Amina whispered. Chidi's phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram Live. Kemi was streaming, and she already had 10,000 viewers. "My name is Kemi Okwu," her voice came through his phone speaker. "You all want to know the truth about my father. Well, I'm going to tell you. But first, you need to understand something about truth. It's not always simple, and it's not always fair." Inside the ballroom, the city's elite were taking their seats at tables that cost 50,000 naira per plate. Government ministers sat next to oil executives, bank presidents chatted with foreign diplomats, and society wives compared jewelry while their husbands discussed business deals that would reshape the Nigerian economy. At the head table, an empty chair waited for Chidi Okwu, the man of the hour who might not show up to receive his honor. "Ladies and gentlemen," the evening's host announced, "we're experiencing a slight delay in our program. In the meantime, please enjoy the champagne and canapés while we resolve some technical difficulties." But there were no technical difficulties. Everyone in the room knew what was really happening. They had all seen the viral videos, read the newspaper headlines, heard the whispered rumors. Tonight wasn't just about philanthropy. It was about witnessing the fall of one of Nigeria's most powerful men. Outside, Chidi finally made his decision. "If I'm going down, I'm going down fighting." He stepped out of the Mercedes into the chaos of camera flashes and shouted questions. The red carpet stretched before him like a gauntlet, but he walked it with the bearing of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Mr. Okwu, is it true you were involved in the Onitsha building collapse?" "Sir, what do you say to allegations that you bribed officials?" "Mr. Okwu, are you going to jail?" The questions came like bullets, but Chidi kept walking, his eyes fixed on the ballroom entrance where his fate waited. Inside, A murmur went through the crowd as he appeared. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. All eyes turned to watch him make his way to the head table, where other honorees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The evening's host, a prominent television personality, approached the podium with obvious reluctance. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have with us tonight Mr. Chidi Okwu, founder of the Okwu Foundation and tonight's recipient of our Lifetime Achievement Award." Polite applause rippled through the room, but it sounded hollow, uncertain. These people were waiting for something to happen, sensing drama in the air like animals before a storm. Chidi stood to accept his award, and for a moment, it seemed like the evening might proceed normally. But then the ballroom doors burst open with a crash that silenced every conversation. Emeka strode into the room like an avenging angel. He had cleaned up since his appearance at their dinner table. His clothes were neat, his hair combed, his scar visible but not angry-looking. He looked like what he was, a man with nothing to lose and everything to say. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed across the ballroom without need for a microphone, "you are about to honor a murderer." Gasps echoed through the room. Phones appeared instantly, recording everything. The society photographers who had been hired to capture beautiful moments found themselves documenting something far more dramatic. "This man," Emeka pointed directly at Chidi, "abandoned his own daughter to poverty, let me rot in prison for his crimes, and built his empire on the graves of 12 innocent people." Security guards began moving toward him, but Emeka was ready. From his jacket, he pulled out a small recording device and held it high above his head. "I have recordings," he announced. "Conversations from 25 years ago. Your hero discussing bribes, cover-ups, and the elimination of witnesses. Would you like to hear how philanthropists really make their fortunes?" The room erupted in chaos. Some guests pushed toward the exits, not wanting to be associated with whatever scandal was unfolding. Others pressed closer, their phones recording everything, knowing they were witnessing history. But then something happened that no one expected. Kemi walked onto the stage. At 16, she looked impossibly young under the ballroom lights, but her voice carried the authority of someone much older when she took the microphone. "Uncle Emeka is right about some things," she said, her words cutting through the noise like a sword. "My father made terrible mistakes 25 years ago. He let people die because he was desperate and greedy and young." The crowd fell silent, hanging on every word. "But Uncle Emeka is wrong about something else. He says my father abandoned his daughter to poverty. The truth is, my father didn't abandon just one daughter. He abandoned two." She turned to look directly at Emeka, her young face grave with knowledge that should have been beyond her years. "Tell them, Uncle Emeka. Tell them about Adiz. Tell them about the daughter you never mentioned. Tell them why you really came back into our lives." The ballroom fell silent as a tomb. Every eye turned to Emeka, whose confident expression had suddenly become uncertain. "Tell them," Kemi continued, "about the DNA test results you've been hiding. About the daughter who's been living with you all these years, believing you were her father, when really she belongs to mine." Plot twist. The hunter has become the hunted. Comment, shocked, if you didn't see this coming. What do you think? Is Emeka the hero or the villain? Share this story if you love unexpected revelations. Subscribe now because the final chapters will blow your mind. The silence in the ballroom stretched like a held breath. 500 of Nigeria's most powerful people sat frozen, their champagne glasses forgotten, their conversations abandoned, as they processed the bombshell that had just exploded from the mouth of a 16-year-old girl. Emeka stood in the center of the room, no longer the confident avenger who had burst through the doors minutes earlier. His weathered face had gone pale, and his hands, the same hands that had once saved Chidi's life, now trembled slightly as all eyes turned to him. "What daughter?" someone whispered from the crowd, but the question carried in the absolute silence. Kemi stood at the podium, her young face set with determination that reminded everyone present why she was Chidi Okwa's child. "Her name is Adiz," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "She's 18 years old, and she's been living with Uncle Emeka for the past 3 years, believing he rescued her from the streets out of pure kindness." The crowd shifted restlessly. This was no longer about business scandals or political corruption. This was becoming a family drama played out on the grandest stage Lagos could provide. "But the truth," Kemi continued, pulling a manila envelope from her small purse, "is that Uncle Emeka has been raising Papa's daughter while planning his revenge, using her as a weapon without her even knowing it." Chidi, who had been standing frozen beside the head table, suddenly found his voice. "Adiz, my daughter is alive." The question hung in the air like a prayer. 20 years ago, a young woman named Ngozi had told him she was pregnant with his child. He had been scared, barely 25 himself, struggling to build his first business. He had given her money and promised to come back after he established himself in America. By the time he returned to Nigeria 3 years later, wealthy enough to take care of a family, Ngozi had vanished. His private investigators found only rumors. Some said she had died in childbirth, others claimed she had moved to a different state. After months of searching, he had given up, telling himself she had probably been lying about the pregnancy anyway. "Oh, she's very much alive," Emeka said, his voice carrying bitter satisfaction despite being caught off guard. "Beautiful, intelligent, and completely convinced that her father is a wealthy man who abandoned her and her mother to poverty and death." From the crowd came a collective intake of breath. This was better than any Nollywood movie. Real-life drama involving some of the country's most prominent citizens. "Where is she?" Chidi stepped forward, his businessman's composure cracking to reveal the desperate father underneath. "If she's my daughter, I need to see her." "She's outside," Emeka smiled coldly, waiting for her cue to come in and confront the man who destroyed her childhood. But Kemi held up her hand, commanding attention with the authority of someone who had clearly been preparing for this moment. "Before we bring her in, everyone needs to understand how we got here. Uncle Emeka, tell them about the phone calls." "What phone calls?" Emeka's confidence wavered further. Kemi pulled out her phone and began swiping through screens. "The phone calls you've been having for months with someone named Kunnel. The ones I recorded when I started investigating our family's secrets." The name hit the room like another bombshell. Several people in the crowd recognized it. Barrister Kunnel Ademola was one of Nigeria's most notorious lawyers, famous for taking down wealthy men in messy divorce proceedings. "That's right," Kemi continued, her teenage voice carrying the weight of an adult revelation. "Uncle Emeka didn't just stumble back into our lives by accident. He's been working with my mother's lawyer to destroy Papa. They've been planning this for months." From her seat at the head table, Amina suddenly stood up, her face a mask of fury and fear. "Kemi, stop talking. Now." "No, Mummy." For the first time that evening, Kemi's voice cracked slightly with emotion. "I'm tired of lies. I'm tired of watching our family tear itself apart because adults can't face the truth." She looked out over the crowd of Nigeria's most powerful people and made a decision that would change all their lives forever. "I'm going to play the recording," she announced. Before anyone could stop her, she connected her phone to the ballroom's sound system. Emeka's voice filled the room, but this time he wasn't speaking with the righteous anger of a wronged man. He was speaking with the cold calculation of a conspirator. "The girl doesn't know yet," his recorded voice said. "As far as she's concerned, I'm the man who saved her from the streets. When the time comes, I'll tell her the truth about her father. It will destroy him more than any public confession could." Another voice responded, older, more sophisticated. "And the wife? Amina is ready to file for divorce the moment he confesses publicly. She'll get everything, The businesses, the properties, the offshore accounts. By the time we're done, Chidi Okwa will have nothing. What about the children? His legitimate children. There was a pause before Emeka's voice continued, colder now. They'll survive. Rich children always do. But they'll learn that their father is a murderer, and that lesson will last forever. The recording ended, leaving the ballroom in stunned silence. Even the society photographers had stopped taking pictures, too shocked by what they were hearing to remember their jobs. Chidi looked between his wife and his former best friend, seeing clearly for the first time how completely he had been manipulated. Both of you, he said quietly. You've both been using my guilt against me. Using our children as weapons in your revenge fantasies. Amina's composure cracked. You destroyed my life. You stole me from the man I loved, built our marriage on lies, and now you want to play victim. And you, Chidi turned to Emeka, you've been torturing an innocent girl for 3 years, letting her believe her father abandoned her, just to hurt me. She needed to know the truth about what kind of man you are, Emeka shot back, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. The truth. Kemi's voice cut through their argument. The truth is that all 3 of you have been so busy plotting revenge that you forgot about the people getting hurt in the crossfire. Me. Emeka. And Adiz, who doesn't even know she's a pawn in your game. As if summoned by her name, the ballroom doors opened again. This time, a young woman entered, tall, graceful, with Chidi's eyes and a face that could have belonged to either of her parents. She wore a simple dress that had clearly been bought second-hand, but she carried herself with natural dignity that money couldn't purchase. Adiz looked around the opulent ballroom with obvious discomfort. Then her gaze found Emeka. Uncle Emeka, you said you had something important to tell me. What's going on? Why are there so many cameras? The 2 daughters, one raised in luxury, one in poverty, both victims of their parents' choices, stood on opposite sides of the ballroom, looking at each other across a gulf of years and secrets. Hello, sister, Kemi said softly, her voice carrying through the microphone. I think it's time you learned the truth about our father. The tension in the ballroom was thick enough to cut with a knife as 2 daughters, one raised in Nigerian luxury, one in poverty, stared at each other across a room full of the country's most powerful people. The revelation hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to consume everything. Adiz stood frozen near the entrance, her intelligent eyes moving from face to face as she tried to process what she had just heard. At 18, she had the kind of beauty that came from good bones and hard living, refined features marked by the wisdom that only struggle could bring. Her second-hand dress, carefully mended and pressed, stood in stark contrast to the designer gowns surrounding her. Sister, she repeated, her voice barely audible but carrying clearly through the ballroom sound system. What do you mean, sister? Kemi stepped down from the podium, moving toward Adiz with the careful movements of someone approaching a wounded animal. At 16, she had been thrust into the role of truth-teller for her entire family, and the weight of that responsibility showed in every line of her young face. Your father, Kemi said gently, and my father are the same person. The man you've been told abandoned you? He never knew you existed. The man who raised you, who you call Uncle Emeka. He's been using you to get revenge. The words hit Adiz like physical blows. She turned to look at Emeka, who stood in the center of the ballroom like a man facing a firing squad. Uncle Emeka? Her voice carried 20 years of trust and 3 years of gratitude. Tell her she's lying. Tell them all she's lying. But Emeka couldn't meet her eyes. The man who had burst into this room with righteous fury just minutes ago now looked like what he was. A broken man who had let his pain turn him into something he never intended to become. I found you on the streets 3 years ago, he said quietly. Your mother had just died. You were selling pure water at traffic lights to pay for her funeral. I took you in because I saw myself in you. Another victim of Chidi Okwa's selfishness. But that's not the whole truth, is it? Kemi pressed, her young voice relentless. Tell her about the DNA test. Tell her about the plans you made with my mother's lawyer. Tell her how you've been grooming her for this moment without her knowledge. The crowd of Nigeria's elite watched this family drama unfold with the fascination of people witnessing a catastrophe. Phones recorded every moment, social media buzzed with real-time updates, and somewhere in Lagos, news editors were preparing headlines that would dominate tomorrow's papers. Adiz looked between Emeka and the man at the head table who was supposed to be her father, Chidi Okwu, whose name she had cursed for most of her life. He was smaller than she had imagined, more fragile-looking. Not the monster from her nightmares, just a middle-aged man whose expensive suit couldn't hide his obvious anguish. "Is it true?" she asked Chidi directly. "Are you my father?" Chidi stepped forward, his legs unsteady beneath him. Up close, he could see Ngozi in Adiz's face, the woman he had loved and lost 20 years ago. But he could also see himself in the set of her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes, the way she held herself with dignity despite being overwhelmed. "I think so," he said hoarsely. "Your mother." "Ngozi. She told me she was pregnant before I left for America. I gave her money, promised to come back for you both. When I returned 3 years later, she had vanished. I searched everywhere, spent hundreds of thousands of naira on private investigators. I thought you had died." "Mama did die." Adiz's voice was cold. "She died of diabetes because she couldn't afford insulin. She died working 3 jobs to put me through secondary school. She died believing the father of her child was too wealthy and important to remember her name." Each word was an accusation, a judgment, a weight that pressed down on Chidi's shoulders. Around them, the ballroom had become a courtroom where his guilt was being tried before 500 judges. "I looked for you," he repeated helplessly. "I swear on my mother's grave, I looked for you." "Not hard enough," Adiz shot back. "But hard enough to name your son after the man you destroyed. Hard enough to build orphanages while your own daughter lived like an orphan." The cruelty of it hit everyone present. Here was a man who had donated millions to children's charities while his own child grew up in poverty. The irony was so complete it seemed almost scripted. But then Amina stood up from the head table, her elegant composure finally cracking completely. "Enough!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the ballroom. "All of you, enough. Do you think this is entertaining? Do you think our family's destruction is your evening's amusement?" She turned to address the crowd directly, her beautiful face twisted with fury and years of suppressed rage. "You want truth? Here's truth. Yes, I've been planning to destroy my husband. Yes, I've been working with Emeka to expose his crimes. Yes, I married him for his money while loving another man. But do you know why?" The ballroom held its breath. Because 22 years ago, Chidi Okwu didn't just steal construction contracts and build his empire on graves. He stole me from the man I loved. He used his dirty money to convince my parents that he was a better match than a struggling law student. He bought me like he bought everything else in his life. She pointed at Kunal, who had been sitting quietly at a corner table, watching his carefully laid plans unravel. "That man loved me purely, completely, without agenda. We were going to build something beautiful together. But Chidi came with his American dollars and his promises of wealth, and my parents sold me to him like a prize cow." The crowd turned to look at Kunal, who stood slowly, his distinguished face grave with decades of suppressed emotion. "It's true," he said simply. "I loved her. I still love her. And I've spent 20 years watching the woman I was supposed to marry live a lie with a man who bought her." "So you used me," Emeka said, understanding finally dawning on his weathered face. "You used my pain, my legitimate grievances, to get your own revenge." "And I used you too," Amina said to Emeka without apology. I used your anger and your guilt and your desire for justice to destroy the man who stole my life. And what about her? Kemi pointed to Adiz. What about your stepdaughter? What about the innocent girl whose life you've been manipulating for 3 years? The question hung in the air unanswered. In their elaborate revenge fantasies, none of the adults had considered the collateral damage they were creating. They had been so focused on their own pain, their own justice, their own desires, that they had turned children into weapons and victims into pawns. Adiz looked around the ballroom at all these powerful adults who had spent years playing games with her life without her knowledge. When she spoke, her voice carried a quiet authority that commanded attention. I have something to say. The room fell silent, waiting. All of you have been lying. All of you have been using people. All of you have been so concerned with your own pain that you forgot other people could be hurt too. She paused, looking directly at each adult in turn. But the biggest lie of all is that any of this was about justice. This was about revenge. And revenge isn't justice, it's just more pain dressed up in righteous clothes. She turned toward the exit, then stopped. I'm 18 years old. I've been taking care of myself since I was 14. I don't need any of you. Not the father who didn't know I existed, not the man who used me for revenge, and certainly not the stepmother who saw me as a tool for her own agenda. She walked toward the ballroom doors with dignity and tact, but then Kemi's voice stopped her. Adiz, wait. The two sisters looked at each other across the room full of adults who had failed them both. We're not them, Kemi said simply. We don't have to carry their mistakes. We can choose differently. For the first time that evening, Adiz smiled. It was small and sad, but it was real. Maybe, she said. But not tonight. Tonight, I need to figure out who I am when I'm not someone else's revenge fantasy. When children become wiser than their parents, the world turns upside down. Comment Adiz if you admire her strength, Kemi if you're proud of her courage. Share this if you believe the next generation can heal the wounds of the past. Subscribe, the finale will restore your faith in family. 6 months later, as Lagos prepared for another rainy season, the courtroom of the Federal High Court was packed with journalists, family members, and curious citizens who had followed the Okwa saga from its viral beginning to its legal conclusion. The case had become a symbol of everything both right and wrong with Nigerian society. Wealth built on corruption, justice delayed but not denied, and the price of secrets finally coming due. Chidi Okwu sat in the defendant's dock, no longer the confident billionaire who had once graced magazine covers and government ceremonies. Prison remand had aged him, stripped away the polish of wealth, and left him looking like what he truly was. A middle-aged man facing the consequences of choices made in desperate youth. His empire had crumbled with surprising speed once the full truth emerged. Government contracts were cancelled, business partnerships dissolved, and properties seized as part of ongoing investigations. The Okwu Foundation, ironically, was the only part of his legacy that survived intact. Now run independently by a board that included both Kemi and Adiz, ensuring that his charitable work would continue even if his name was removed from it. In the gallery, his family sat in a row that told the story of their transformation. Amina, dressed simply for the first time in years, sat with her divorce decree finalized but without the victory she had imagined. The courts had been less generous than Kunal had promised. With most of Chidi's assets frozen pending criminal proceedings, there was little left to divide. Her grand revenge had left her financially comfortable but emotionally bankrupt. Beside her sat young Emeka, now 15 and bearing the weight of sharing a name with the man who had helped destroy his father. He had asked to change his name, but Kemi had convinced him otherwise. Our names don't define us, she had told him. Our choices do. Kemi herself sat between her brother and her newly discovered sister, a bridge between two worlds that were slowly learning to become one. At 17 now, she carried herself with the gravity of someone who had been forced to become an adult too quickly, but her eyes still held hope for the future she was helping to build. Adiz had cut her hair short and started university on a scholarship funded by the same foundation that bore her father's name. An irony that wasn't lost on anyone present. She had chosen to study social work, determined to help children who, like her, had been caught in the crossfire of adult failures. The other Emeka, the man whose quest for justice had started this entire saga, sat across the courtroom aisle. Prison had aged him beyond his years, but today his eyes held something they hadn't contained in decades: peace. Not the peace of victory, but the peace of truth finally told. "All rise," the court clerk announced as Justice Adebayo entered. The elderly judge had overseen some of Nigeria's most important cases, but even she seemed moved by the drama that had unfolded in her courtroom over the past months. Before this court renders its final judgment, Justice Adebayo began, the defendant has requested permission to make a statement. "Mr. Okwu, you may proceed." Chidi stood slowly, his prison uniform a stark contrast to the expensive suits he had once worn. When he spoke, his voice carried no trace of the commanding presence that had once dominated boardrooms and political meetings. "Your Honor, there is nothing I can say that will bring back the 12 people who died because of my negligence. There is nothing I can do that will restore the years of freedom that Emeka lost because of my cowardice. There is nothing I can offer that will return the childhood my daughter Adiz should have had." He paused, looking directly at his family. "But there is something I can do for the future. I formally confess to all charges brought against me. I waive my right to appeal. And I transfer all remaining assets not already seized by the state to a trust fund that will compensate the families of my victims and provide for children like my daughter who have been failed by the adults meant to protect them." A murmur ran through the courtroom. This was not the defiant stance of a wealthy man trying to buy his way out of justice. This was genuine contrition. "Furthermore," Chidi continued, "I ask this court's permission to serve my sentence working in the communities I damaged. Let me spend my remaining years building houses that won't collapse, schools that won't fail, and programs that actually help rather than merely provide photo opportunities for my conscience." Justice Adebayo nodded slowly. "Mr. Okwu, this court sentences you to 15 years imprisonment for corruption, negligent homicide, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. However, given your cooperation with authorities and your victim impact mitigation plan, the court will allow you to serve 8 of those years in community service under strict supervision." The gavel fell, but instead of the usual drama of families weeping or defendants protesting, something different happened. Emeka, the man whose accusations had started this all, stood and walked to the defendant's dock. For a moment, the two former friends looked at each other across 25 years of pain, betrayal, and finally, truth. "I forgive you, brother," Emeka said simply. "Not because you deserve it, but because I'm tired of carrying hatred." Chidi's composure finally broke. 25 years of guilt poured out in tears that had been held back by pride, fear, and the terrible weight of secrets. "Can you forgive me?" he asked, his voice breaking. "I already have. But the real question is, can you forgive yourself enough to do better?" As they stood there, two men who had both lost so much to pride and poor choices, their daughters watched from the gallery. Kemi and Adiz had spent the last 6 months getting to know each other, building a relationship based on honesty rather than the lies that had defined their parents' generation. Outside the courthouse, as the first drops of the season's rain began to fall, the extended family gathered under the same Lagos sky that had witnessed their first dramatic encounter months before. But this time, the rain felt different, not like judgment, but like cleansing. "What happens now?" young Emeka asked, looking between his father in prison clothes and the man whose name he shared. "Now we do the work," Adiz answered. "The real work of healing, building, and making sure this never happens again." Kemi pulled out her phone, not to record drama this time, but to check the Foundation's latest project updates. "The new school in Onitsha is almost finished," she announced. "Built with proper materials, proper oversight, and proper respect for the people who will use it. Chidi looked at his daughters, one raised in luxury who had chosen service, one raised in poverty who had chosen forgiveness, and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: hope. "I won't be able to walk you down the aisle at your weddings," he said to them both. "I won't be there for your graduations or your children's births. But maybe I can build something with my remaining years that you can be proud to inherit." As the rain fell harder, washing the dust from Lagos's busy streets, the family stood together, not as they had been, bound by secrets and lies, but as they were choosing to become, bound by truth and the harder work of redemption. The viral video that had started their story had shown a billionaire and a beggar in the rain. Now, months later, there were no billionaires or beggars in their family. Just people who had learned that the only wealth that matters is the kind that can survive the truth being told. This is how our ancestors taught us: every seed we plant, good or evil, will eventually bear fruit. But redemption is always possible for those brave enough to face their truth and do the work of healing. What did this story teach you about family, forgiveness, and the price of lies? Share this complete story if it moved you. Comment your biggest lesson below. From Lagos to London, Kano to California, wherever you're watching, remember, the truth may hurt, but lies hurt longer. Subscribe for more powerful African stories that entertain while they educate. Like our ancestors said, when the roots of a tree are rotten, the whole tree must be replanted. But from good soil, even a damaged seed can grow into something beautiful.